Okay, well, welcome everyone, and this is our opportunity to celebrate the achievement of our collected book. So, if you've got a cup handy or a glass of water or some orange juice, cheers to everyone.
Cheers.
Yeah, and thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Congratulations to everybody.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
In Australia, we have adopted a practice where we begin a meeting with acknowledgement of country. So today I acknowledge that I am meeting with you on the lands of the Ngunnawal or the Ngambri people here in Canberra, Australia. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are today and pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and respect to all the Indigenous people joining us today.
Unfortunately, the co-editor, Candy Corsair, wasn't able to join us today, though she wishes us well. I want to acknowledge her contribution and thank her for advice and assistance.
And I'd like to acknowledge the contributing authors. Thank you for joining. Really appreciate it. I really look forward to this opportunity to meet. The cover artist, Jasmine, and Leanne Sheeran, who is one of the authors for the paper that sort of inspired the book. She'll be joining us, having something to say. And I also want to acknowledge the fantastic work of Demeter Press and continuing, incredible after all these years. And I believe they've got their books ready for publication next year. There's a list already put together for next year, so it's continuing, which is wonderful. So I just wanted to start with a few comments from me, just drawing mostly from the introduction. So throughout much of European history, daughters have been beholden to their mothers, women who had few to no individual rights and were pawns to be traded or subsumed to the wider socio-political concerns. Women who were in positions of influence were confronted with the need to coerce or manipulate their daughters' marriage options to maintain their own privilege. This is where we're coming from. Mothers were most often the enforcers of patriarchal practice with little option for deviation. The mother's role was to teach her daughters to be good wives, to pass on the required skills, to attend to the domestic realm, to manage cooks and servants for the wealthy families, and for the rest it was to cook, to clean, to sew, and to care for infants and children. And I have to say my mum did a good job on that. She used to, she had little tricks for training me. But I've successfully rebelled enough, I think. Further to this was a need for women to be chaste and obedient and to be moral and virtuous, attributes that are commonly associated today with the good mother. And landmark work by Adrienne Rich in Of Woman Born, through her mix of history, poetry and creative writing, was written in the 70s, and I think the text is kind of a little, reflects the 70s way that people spoke, but it's a wonderful book and wonderful addition to the body of literature in this field. And she described in there her connection with her mother, which I didn't really pick up until I read it from that point of view. And she said she came to understand the guilt that came between her and her mother as a product of what she says, institutionalisation of motherhood, with the roles and the social structured expectations that are carried through cultural beliefs and practices. And that's wonderful that this network critiques that motherhood. Mothers often modelled the maternal role, and even if they too might have been ambivalent or sceptical about the constraints, anything else was read as a failure to care. Particularly in light of legendary issues related to identity for women today, I argue it's important to recognise and embed the subject of the woman and the father to some extent, but most importantly the woman, particularly in the early years for the birth and the early years afterwards, because I believe the mother-infant connection is foundational for the infant, and tragic that it's not recognised enough and explored enough. So within the related research, the mother's experience of infancy and the mother's connection with her own mother are recognised as important, influence impactors over the experience of women during these early years after the birth, and yet there's little research exploring the connections, and that's where I think our book is making a really good contribution. And hopefully, you know, we'll kind of encourage more people to write about it. Certainly there are responsibilities to care and protect infants and children, and this is where it's important for our health and the social systems to embed the care and protection of infants and their mothers. It's ridiculous we have to say that, but we do have to say it, unfortunately, and we have to keep saying it. I mean, I've been contributing discussions on the first 1,000 days, and I always bring up, you can't just talk about the baby, you have to talk about the mother as well. You know, it's a continuing discussion. There's a lot more to be said along these lines. Suffice to say that I have 2 related presentations on YouTube. One's titled Intersubjectivity, Mothers and Infants, and there's a second one, Infant Brain and Australian Social Policy. That was a talk I gave at Rostrum. It's good to see that today there are emerging books referencing the mother-daughter connection. A shortlisted title for the 2020 Booker Prize, Burnt Sugar, includes reflections on the mother-daughter relationship after the birth of a child. And I haven't read that yet, but I'm looking forward to it. And I've just finished reading an Australian author, Jane Caro. She recently had a book published called Mother. And that centrally features the mother-daughter connection from the mother's point of view and in light of the daughter's experience of family violence. And I have to say it's a harrowing tale. And some of the related academic work by Lisa Barista and Alison Stone engage with Julia Christaver's notion of matricide, or the death of the mother, that is said to take place through Western philosophical traditions, whereby the subject of the woman as mother goes unrepresented. Stone posits that maternal subjectivity is tied to the mother's experience of being mothered. She emphasises the importance of recognising and responding to the reworking of mother's experience in infancy after becoming a mother herself. Another significant figure in this field, as you all would know, is Nancy Chodorow, who also discusses this dynamic and says, mothering and maternal identity are internal mother-daughter experiences, and this maternal sense of self, being a mother, having been mothered, goes through the life cycle. The realisation of these influences is necessarily played out differently depending on the relationship and the particularities of each case, a dynamic referenced by Chodorow as maternality. So there's a whole lot of new phrases and terms that have been developed in this field, which is incredible. So notions referenced in the book are the matricentric approach to study, which might be new words some of the people listening in might not have heard, which is placing the mother or the maternal at the centre of description and critique. Matrilineal influences based on kinship with the mother or the female line. Maternography, another word, that is a woman's life story where her maternal memories are explicitly privileged and highlighted within a matricentric feminist frame. Maternography, these are words I guess will be good for us to sort of get familiar with. Another one is matro-reform, transforming maternal practice whereby mothers themselves define and claim a future for themselves. And matrophobia, and that is a fear of becoming one's mother, and a process that can be identified while reading the chapters. And unfortunately, the chapter particularly relevant to that is the Spanish Sabella, and she can't join us, unfortunately, tonight. So, but another wonderful chapter. So I'm proud to have brought together a beautiful collection of stories, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the contributing authors. And the first one we've got today to speak is Sylvia Griffin. Her chapter 10, Perspectives on Motherhood Through the Lens of Post-Memory and Artistic Practice. So Sylvia, would you like to?
Hi everyone. So I asked Joan what she'd like us to talk about, and I guess it's about why I wrote the chapter and about what I see as a contribution to discourse on motherhood and the trials and tribulations around it. So I wrote it basically as a way to understand my own experience, and then as I delved into that, I was really interested to read about other people's experiences, and this idea of suffering trauma, which in retrospect is what my experience was, having parents who'd lived through the Holocaust and lost brothers, sisters and family members, and then migrated to Australia, and in the late 1950s, where we lived in a very suburban North Shore neighbourhood, and they were looked on as refugees basically, and there was a real feeling of being othered, in inverted commas, and I intuited that even as a child, that we were treated differently to other people, and so it was something that became embedded in me. And my parents were quite shut down emotionally, even though I struggled a lot over my life about how it was that my mother could be loving and affectionate but emotionally distant. And I didn't really come to deal with that until I became an adult and I had a child of my own. And as I explained in my chapter, I went through this process of looking at the mothering that I had had, and looking at all the negative side of it, really. And then my mother died, unfortunately. Sorry, excuse my cat. That died when my child was very young, and I kind of feel like I had a lot of trauma upon trauma. My daughter was born with a life-threatening illness, and I really needed my mother. And she was not only emotionally distant, but then dying. And she died when my daughter was 4 months old. And so I went through a period of anger and kind of shut it down, and went through periods of depression in my life. And sorry, it's a bit difficult to talk about still. So art has always featured very strongly in my life, and I went back to university later in life, so about 15 years ago, and I guess I had been doing a lot of painting, but the art that I was drawn to was quite dark, and I knew that I wanted to go beyond representational art. And so I went back to university, and luckily I had a lot of female mentors there who were incredibly supportive, and that gave me the strength to look at what was underlying my art. And I kind of knew that there was this trauma, but I was a bit scared to prod it. But with encouragement, and then going into research and doing a research degree, and then which led me to a PhD, I was able to identify with a lot of the discourse I was reading, and identify this post-memory intergenerational trauma, and suddenly everything made sense. And I started, after 25 years of having a lot of my mother's possessions put away, I pulled them out and started making artwork with them and embedding them into my work, and found it this kind of dichotomy of trauma and darkness and enjoyment in working with it. So part of my PhD was, one of the questions that I asked myself in the PhD was, what is it about working with traumatic material that is so satisfying? And I think it's the unraveling of it. And I became quite resolute about the idea of shining a light on inherited trauma and anxiety, and the links to postnatal depression, and really removing the stigma. I've written other books on mothering. I had another chapter published this year, and I called it The Bad Mother and Mental Illness, because I have a son with mental illness. And this idea of mothers being held responsible for everything that goes wrong, and destigmatizing it, and just the need that we all have to belong, and mothers and children to be embedded into us and knitted into society is so important. And, as we know, the more silence breeds shame and isolation and mental health issues. And so I've been really enjoying being involved in bringing the private into the public, and in the role of art as a way of communicating this with, not only for ourselves as artists and mothers, but to a general public. And I see art as a way of giving a space to people to contemplate their own grief and trauma issues, and to bring together a community. And I also think it's a really beautiful way to use art in a metaphoric sense, and the beauty of using art to relay these emotions and these ideas rather than being didactic and representational. So it kind of gives space without being confrontational. And I've found in the exhibitions I've done and the work I've done, I get really wonderful responses, which again affirms in me that it's a really important thing to be able to communicate trauma and to be honest about it. And, this idea of unravelling, when I talk about the use of metaphor in art and a way of communicating, I've done work of unravelling a jumper my mother had knitted 60 years earlier for my sister, and the emotional process of the unravelling and, all the associations with that, and then the re-knitting of it. And the re-knitting of it, it held the memory, 60 years of memory, in the lumpiness of the wool. I didn't stretch it or steam it. I used it as it was when I unravelled it. And it's all on the video, and sort of the emotions I went through, which were unexpected, the anger I had in doing it. And, I had imagined that I would be there dabbing my eyes with tissues and thinking all these lovely thoughts about my mother. But in reality, I was cursing her because, there was a knot at the end of every row, and it took me 5 hours rather than half an hour. And what an accurate depiction that was, and sort of embracing that ambivalence in a mother-daughter relationship. And I had it in my graduate, the video and the finished artwork in my graduation show for my PhD. And I think the biggest compliment I got was people saying that they cried when they saw it. And I thought, it's great that people get it. Like, we can work really hard to express how we feel, but in communicating what we feel is just as important, if not more so, I think. So I talk in my chapter about my great depth of grief in the fact that I had unwittingly passed a lot of what I criticised my mother about in the withholding of information, the lack of communication, that I had my daughter let me know when she was pregnant, and earlier than that as well, about all the grievances she had about me. And I thought that I had done everything I could to counter what I thought had been done to me, and to realise that I'd passed that on was quite devastating. I've had a lot of counselling over the years over these issues, which is incredibly helpful and given me a lot of insight. But I'm pleased to say that since she's had her third child, we've worked on making new memories, and that's what I've been trying to concentrate with her. That I've apologised, I've admitted to what I can see from her point of view was difficult, and tried to explain to her the reasons why, which I never got the chance to do with my mother, unfortunately. And since she's had a third baby, she does need me more, which makes a difference. And we've got a lot closer through this next generation, and hopefully we can only hope that the cycle stops there, but time will tell, and it's always a work in progress. So I think that's about it for me. I don't know how with time, but
that's okay. Thanks, Sylvia. That was incredible and so important. One of the feedback I've had from someone who's read the book in one day, she said she had to stop because she couldn't stop crying. I think that might be a bit of a response. So, and it reminded me, I've got a friend who actually is a poet, and she wrote a poem years ago called "I Hate My Mother," which is, radical, I think. But she said, after she wrote it, she felt better. I think it's important.
There's a lot of shame around admitting feelings less than undying love for your mother.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the next person we've got to speak is Cassie Primo Steele, and her chapter is chapter 6, Becoming a Mother Philosopher. Another wonderful addition. Cassie?
Thank you, Joan and Sylvia. That was beautiful. My chapter is a personal essay about my relationship with my mother and how she has been a philosopher and critical thinker and critical person, whereas I tend to the emotion and think of myself primarily as a poet. And late in life, midway through my life, when my daughter was 13 and my stepdaughter was 22, I came out as a lesbian. And this was a pivotal moment in my relationship with my mother. But really, throughout the whole essay, the big question is, who are we? Who are we as daughters? Who are we as mothers? And how does our identity change throughout our life? And particularly how are our relationships always changing as we are always changing? And so I thought I would just read a couple paragraphs to you to get a sense of what this is like. I always knew I was different from the person my parents thought I was born to be. I changed my name at the age of 3. Until that time, my babysitter Mary had the same name as I did, Mary. My birth name is Mary. My aunt's name was Mary too. I was born at St. Joseph's Hospital, and you know the name of his wife. So many Marys, a river of Marys. I could not stand to step into another one. Here is what I did. I waited until my mother was getting dressed to go out. She was busy. She was rushed. She was distracted. It was a perfect setting for my announcement. My mother was sitting at a makeup table, looking in the mirror, wearing a long orange maxi dress. It was 1970, and they were everywhere. And I walked into the room and said, "Do not call me Mary anymore. From now on, my name is Cassie." She looked at me. She held her clip-on earring an inch away from her ear, as if in a still frame painting, and she said nothing. No argument, no admonition, no dismissal. From that moment in 1970 and for the rest of my life, people have called me Cassie. It is my name. It is who I am. Hardly anyone knows that my birth name is Mary. It feels like another person to me. I feel like if I had stayed Mary, I would still be in the Midwest, would have married a Catholic man, would still go to church regularly, and might occasionally vote Republican. Thank you. Thank you. And it's wonderful to meet everyone here today. And I especially want to thank Joan for her wonderful leadership.
Yeah, thank you, Cassie. Yeah, it's amazing to have grown up with a mother who was a philosopher. So, another terrific addition to the collection, and the story about catching your mum with the friends on the table. That's great. Yeah. Our next speaker is Astrid Ocho Campo, and her chapter is chapter 13, Daughters and Their Mothers in Latrinx, Memoirs of Sherry Managa and Anika Farado. Sorry if I've pronounced them wrongly, Astrid. If you could correct me, that'd be great.
Thank you, Joan. We'll see. So is Cherry Moraga and Anika Fajardo. Well, first of all, thank you so much. I'm really excited for this book launch. I really enjoyed participating in the project, and I haven't had a chance to read the whole book, all the essays, but I'm really looking forward to do it now over the Thanksgiving break. And so for people who joined that were not here when we were introducing each other. So my name is Astrid Lorena Ochoa Campo, and I go by Lorena. So I will, ask you to call me Lorena from this point on. I am originally from Colombia. So I am an immigrant in the United States, and I have been living here for 16 years. Unlike other authors here, I am not a mother yet. And my work with motherhood studies, came out with stemmed from my research on Latin American women writers. So as I was looking for a topic that was interesting enough for me, that's what the advice that I got when I was about to write the proposal for my dissertation was to pick a topic that I could obsess about. And so at the time, a lot of my friends were having children. I myself have been a caretaker when I first arrived in the U.S., and I have been a school teacher for many years, and so I was familiar with children. But then as I started, reading what authors were writing at the moment in Spanish initially, I noticed a trend, right? So I became interested. And so I got a hold of these two memoirs while I was writing my dissertation. And I read them as a break. And they turned out to be a paper. But yes. So, and I got to meet Cherry Moraga, which is a very, well-known Chicana author, and of Mexican descent, born in the U.S. And she had just written her memoir, and it was all about her mother. Anika Fajardo is memoir was her first book. It's her memoir. She's a writer. She's actually also based in the Midwest, and I was reading her memoir because she's Colombian actually, but raised in the U.S. and was grappling with this with identity issues. So the book is about her father, but when you read it, it turns out to be much more about her mother. So that when I was reading, after I finished reading these two books, the thing that stood out to me was this kind of like a moment, or the moments when they describe something like they get it. They become mothers, and all of a sudden they get it. And so I at the moment, to me, I kind of connected the dots, but I didn't think about writing about. So this essay that I wrote just for this collection, because it also clicked for me after I was done with all the rush of the dissertation. And so I've been thinking more and more about those moments, and I keep seeing that represented in the literature of Latin American women writers, or also women from Spain. There is just an abundance of memoirs on in what it takes right now to be a mother. That moment where you have all these hopes and dreams, and then you can't, because you have fertility issues and things like that. So I I noticed that, before, even when I was doing, research on mother-daughter relationship, a lot of the things focused about, the conflicts, right? But I wanted to focus my attention in what seems a positive aspect, that, moment where you can empathize with your mother and understand better, because you're going through a similar experience yourself. So that's the basis of the this essay, is empathy, and this aha moment, right, that happens once daughters become mothers.
Yeah, thanks, Lorena.
Yeah.
Lorena, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it is a heart project, and it's wonderful that there's such a great diversity of experiences and also cultural backgrounds. So I think that's attributed to Demeter Press and the fantastic connections that they've made across the globe. And so I hope Andrea is able to join us later so we can thank her as well for the work she's done to bring us together. So thank you. The next one to speak is Andy Spark. Her chapter is chapter 5, and Mother of Mother, the graphic chapter.
Right. Thanks, Joan. Lovely to meet everybody here also. I'm just talking a little bit about the background to this chapter. I'm actually primarily an animator, and I come from, a graphic and an artist background, and I've done a lot of work in my dissertation also about the representation of adult women, and particularly about mothering in animation. And I said, one of the things about adult women in the way they're shown in animation is that they're either witches, bitches, or housewives. And I said, I've always had this kind of, sense of wanting to, depict the truth or the reality of what it's like to be an adult woman in animation. So the chapter actually sagged somewhat from that, in that it's a lot of the animating work that I'd been doing was small little interstitial pieces that talked about early mothering experience, about postnatal depression, about a sense of entering into that new mothering kind of world. So some of this particular chapter actually really was triggered by the call for papers, and a lot of the time, there's all these things that are sort of sitting in my tummy, rumbling, and then somebody mentions something, and I think, oh, I'll write about that, and so this one actually seriously did come just from, that moment where it said, let's reflect a little bit on your own mothering, when you became the mother. And of course, my chapter, if anybody has had the chance to read it, is about me being in the middle between my mother dying and my daughter having a baby. And it was quite dramatic in many, many ways. But I wanted to actually downplay it in some ways. I wanted to add a touch of kind of humor, to add a touch of irony, a sense of, recognition of our messiness of things. And I also wanted to be a little bit brutally honest, be behind that mask of the cartoon character in a way, in the fact that we don't actually see me very much in the imagery, and it's really about looking at the baby and the mother and the children at the time. And so the author narrator as such is a little bit behind the scenes, and yet and yet the author narrator she is central to the whole thing, and I think it was a way it sort of kind of carried through a thread of what I'd been doing with the animation pieces, is that, and as much as I'm talking about a collective experience in some ways, like an experience that a lot of people might kind of have a twinge of recognition, it's all about me, everything's about me, and so but it's kind of not, like, so I wanted to try and play a little bit with that. I thought, when Sylvia was talking also, you say so much that is seeds of, small seeds of recognition that all of us get in this, whether we're mothers, whether we're not, whether we've had a great mothering relationship, we would have a traumatic mothering relationship. And actually, I think a little bit about, again, that sense of sort of passing on the intergenerational trauma, as one of my daughters says. And she said one of our kind of quests, I suppose, is to stop that and or address it, to be honest about your own contribution to that. And I think there's a little bit about that chapter that sort of quietly and gently examined something about where do we sit in that kind of intergenerational part. So the fact that Joan and Candy even kind of proposed this idea, I think, was really, really important, because it's certainly something we don't really talk about very much, and we don't really face ourselves as mothers also.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. There's so many things came to mind to say, and but one of them was that I wanted to also thank all the authors for being so brave, because I think that's one reason why there isn't a lot published, because it does take a certain courage to speak about the ambivalences or the complexity of the relationship. Mother's Day is all about sort of roses and flowers and all the beautiful things, which is lovely to acknowledge and respect our mothers, but it needs to be authentic and genuine, and the genuine part of it is complex. It's not any relationship is complex, but I think particularly that one is a complex one that is great to explore. The next speaker is Jasmine Simonson. She's our cover artist, and love Jasmine to have a few words to give us some background on her thinking of the artwork that she's done for us. Jasmine, you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Today is my daughter's 21st birthday. And it's 8:15 in the morning, and my whole household is sort of wanting to wake up and get into this birthday feel. I can feel that sort of energy around me. I just wanted to say thank you to you, Joan, for the opportunity. I wish I had seen the call for papers. I would love to have written. But this is my third book cover for the topic of maternity, and I feel really grateful to be able to offer that. So for me, I have always had a relationship with art, and I was an art teacher. I had my daughter, and it was the most joyous experience, but also enormously difficult, feeling like I hit a brick wall, because I had been accustomed to jamming so much into my life, into every day, and all of a sudden everything went slow and quiet, and I felt very strange about not being able to get a million things done in a day. And I also realized that in culture there was no story to explain this to me, and that the language was missing as well. And so I started to paint, and that was the only medium I'd never had a relationship with before. And it belonged solely to my experience of being a mum and trying to come to terms with that. So it was slippery, it was, I related so much with so much that Sylvia said. I had to sort of re-understand my own childhood. And in doing so, I had to re-understand my mums and even my nanas a little bit. I had to understand myself as a person who travelled through time and continues to travel forward, that I'm not singular, that I am everything that's ever happened, and especially in my maternal life before me. I had to speak, Sylvia, like you, through all of these objects that I owned that were from my childhood, from my mother's childhood, from my grandmother's, and even my great-grandmother's. And these things spoke to me, and I needed to find out what it was that they had to say, and that they were giving me language in the present. So the topics for me were subjectivity, temporality, and materiality. And so this medium of paint took on this huge metaphorical significance, because it had this sort of ambiguous. Everything became ambiguous. So being a student, doing a practice-led research project, so I did a PhD, finished in 2016. I think I was quite a controversial candidate. The professor didn't really support, and he questioned the validity of my research, like it was something that didn't deserve to be spoken about. I was the only candidate, a very, very dedicated candidate, but the only candidate that he said at the end of the critique, he said, "I'm not convinced." And I had another English professor come over and rip my work to shreds, and in front of my whole cohort. And also I had the experience of a senior professor who used to say at the end of each critique, "It's so difficult. Oh, it's disturbing. It's so difficult." And so, and then I would have these amazing experiences of people saying, "Oh my God, that sings to me, that, that's so special to me that somebody has told this thing that I haven't been able to articulate." So there were these really dichotomous experiences. And I had Denise Ferris from ANU. She was the main assessor for my project in the end, and she took my professor out to lunch, and she said, "You have no idea, the way this story has been told is just so relevant. It just sang to me so much." And and she didn't know how critical he'd been, but he was really nice to me after that. So using words like psychoanalytic feminism, maternality, and matricentric, when I was speaking to my cohort, I think they thought I was making it up, that I was overcomplicating something that deserved to be spoken about in such simple terms, but most of all, I think they thought I had a problem, and that I had some serious stuff to unpack about being a mum. And I like what Sylvia said about taking the private into the public. And I felt really brave, but I felt precariously vulnerable as well the whole time that I was doing my PhD. And so the work, just briefly, if I know that Joan told me that there was a very wide range of experiences when people saw the cover. And for me, I like that. I think, you need to be poked and prodded in the world of art. And but for me, it was like Sylvia explained, the dish, the tureen at the sort of the central shape is the oldest thing owned in my family. And given the relationship with the maternal, for me, that was a really critical sort of backdrop for thinking. All of the lace doilies and things that have been kept, they became the vegetables for the meal, for the roast, for the offering. And then for me, the space of feeling and thinking that is maternal is here, and it's where I feel from and where I think from, but also it feels like that part of me is the part that has lived a long time before and goes on. There's some sort of core ongoing thing, your heart and your organs and your reproductive system, and so it's nicknamed Guts on a Plate, and it belongs to a friend who saw it and said, "Oh my goodness, I understand the beauty and the pain of that." And so I'm glad that she owns it.
Yeah, thanks, Jasmine. I have to say I'm one of the lovers of your work, and I'm really love that it's a cover, and I love that it's confronting, you know, and body parts. A lot of people have issues looking at them because it's confronting, but I don't know. I don't have a nursing background, but I don't have a problem with seeing body parts on a plate. And I love the title and offering. I think it's really appropriate for this collection. So, yeah, thanks very much. It's beautiful, and just keep on doing what you're doing. It's so important.
Thank you, Joan.
Yeah. And so, Leanne Sheeran, are you here today? I can't see all the people, that Leanne was going to join us. She is a co-author for the article that really inspired the work, because I came across it at some point a few years ago, and it's called A Woman's Relationship with Their Own Mother in the Early Motherhood Period. And she said that came out of her PhD as well. But I'm thinking she might not be here because I'm not hearing from her. And I just wanted to mention also that Andrea O'Reilly said that she would join in if she could, but she had a meeting, and I don't think she's here yet either, because it would have been lovely to hear from Andrea. So is everyone okay for a bit of discussion? You know, would you? Oh, Maddie, here we go.
Hi, everyone. That was lovely. Thank you so much. I have a question for, I think it was Sylvia who was talking about after your mother passed away, making art using some of her things.
Yep.
I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about that process and what that was like, sort of having to go through her things and part with some of her things, but then reinvigorating the meaning or the creating something new with that. I'm just really curious about that.
Yeah, look, I suppose I started off by, I was doing my master's, and I decided to make work about the family and deal with what we had all gone through. So I started off by looking through the old photographs of my family in Hungary before the war, and objects that I found as well that sort of spoke about family. There was when my aunt died, I was going through the photographs and I found a cellophane package with an Edelweiss that she'd brought from Europe with her. And I started making sculptural works and getting away from painting. And I made a series where I embedded the photographs and the Edelweiss and other bits and pieces in wax. I was quite inspired by Joseph Beuys and the work he'd done with wax, and the idea that wax is something that's fluid. It starts off being liquid and solidifies, and it's also used as preserving things. And so I made these things and then carved the back out and backlit them. So I actually had these pieces in the Blake Prize, the Religious Art Prize, and it was sort of my little mementos to my family, and the idea of keeping things safe. And I had my daughter's hair and my husband's hair in wax as well. So it's this started off the whole idea about how I could speak with these artworks. And then I went to my mother's linen that I had folded away in my linen press for 25 years and embraced things like the creases and the rust stains in it, and how these objects can speak about time and about memory and stand in for the missing person. And those ideas really spoke to me and started me off on this sort of tangent of becoming quite obsessed with talking about family and trauma. And yeah, I talked about the work where I unraveled the cardigan my mother had made, and another work I made where I layered the linen. I had a big Perspex box. I had an exhibition at the Sydney Jewish Museum, and one of the new items that I made was this Perspex box where I laid all the linen, and I put things in between the layers of things like my father's prayer book, my mother's sewing things, little reels of cotton and wool, and this sort of matrilineal link that goes through my family of needlework and another sort of way of connection. So it ended up being like a layers, or like a strata of memory that I displayed. It was, and I guess the work I'm doing now, I've sort of progressed from talking about the personal so much and looking at universal aspects of grief and sharing grief and revealing trauma, and using less of personal objects and more about just trying to evoke a visceral response to trauma by the way I use materiality. I might put my website link up if anyone's interested in having a look at the work I've done about this. I could go on forever, but I might leave it there.
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia. And art is a wonderful way, isn't it, I think, to work through some of those kind of experiences and relationships and thoughts. And so, yeah, I'm so glad that your chapter is in there, as well as Allegra Holmes.
Yes, and it's really funny because I met Allegra before I knew she was in this book. We're both Sydney artists, and we both went to Sydney College of the Arts, and she was a finalist in an art prize held at Sydney College of the Arts, and I was there, and I really responded to the work which is in this book. And we talked about the similarities in our work, and then I saw she was in the book and the next chapter, and it was so relevant to what I'm talking about. So I've texted her, and we're now in conversation about that as well. So, it's another way of connecting, and it's amazing. Yeah, it's.
Yeah.
Hi. So I just want to thank you all for these presentations, and yes, and also it was a pleasure to say that it was a pleasure really to be part of this wonderful collection of essays and writings and drawings and all, and also to thank you for the amazing work you did. This is a lot of organization, so thank you so much for that. I think we all really appreciate your efforts, and so thank you very much, and congratulations to all of us.
Yeah, that's right. It is. I'm so glad that we had this opportunity for the authors to speak, because the end of the collection really is the authors. I'm glad that you're able to join today.
If I say something, I can't stop crying. The text is better for everyone, but I'm really, really honorable to being a mom and daughter through all your stories that made me healing and make me a lot of medicine. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Michelle's our most enthusiastic fan at the moment, because she read the book in a day.
Wow.
She just put everything aside and read the whole book. So good on you. Thanks, Michelle.
Can I say something?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'm very honored to listen to all the authors' stories, and I'm here in Korea. Thanks to Michelle Kang, she invited me to this meeting in the morning, and it's 7 in the morning now in Korea. And I'm sorry I don't read your book. Is it Maternal Connections?
Yes.
Or Maternal Connections. It is all about the relationship between mother and daughter. So I don't know if I can purchase the book in Korea, but I will look for Amazon. Is it in Amazon?
Yeah, Amazon, apparently it's available as an ebook online, but
Yeah, okay, thank you. I need to say thank you to all of you, because in the morning I just block my screen, so I just say thank you to all of you, and yeah, it's congratulate on your books. Thank you.
Well, there's authors in Korea who are part of this matricentric or feminist maternal networks who write about the experience. I'll look up some of the names if you haven't come across them, because there are people in Korea who are writing about these topics. It's an international network, which is fabulous. A couple of comments I wanted to make before finishing up is Andrea O'Reilly. If you look up YouTube, she's got a video there on matricentric feminism, and she explains it so well in that video. And so it's on YouTube, called Baby Out with the Bathwater, Andrea O'Reilly. So if anyone wants to follow that up, it's Baby Out with the Bathwater. It's easy to remember, and Andrea O'Reilly, it should come up. For anyone who isn't part of the network, there's an international network of academics, postgraduates, artists, writers, practitioners who are also mothers. And there's a conference coming up for IAMAS, that's the International Association for Maternal Action and Scholarship, based in Chicago. And they'll be available online the 11th and 13th of March. So if you do a Google search on IAMAS Chicago, that'll bring up the page and more information about the conference. The thing is, the time differences. I joined one of the conferences once and it ran through the night, so that was interesting. There's also an Australian network of similar people like that, and it's called the Maternal Scholars Australia. We've got a homepage and our social media, and we have a recording of the launch today, and we plan to upload it soon onto YouTube. So I'll link that to the event page, but also I've set up a homepage, and it's called www, and the title of the book, Maternal Connections When Daughter Becomes Mother.com. And so I'll post a recording there, and let me know if anyone would like to contribute a blog or further the discussion there. There's an opportunity to include blogs, and we can communicate. So if anyone wants to follow up with an email, my email is garvinjoan@gmail.com. A big thank you to Andy for doing the Zoom for us today, and to all the contributors. There's a certain vulnerability, I think, in speaking about these things publicly. And so thank you for your courage, and for the wonderful Demeter Press who just keep on keeping on. Something I wanted to finish with is the dedication that's at the beginning of the book. And one of my friends read it and she said, "Oh, can that be possible?" And you don't get things if you don't want them. And this is, I think, adequately kind of reflects something that we would like to see. With love and gratitude to our mothers and for those who cared for us over generations, time and place. May the significance of the work of care be further understood and truly valued through our social and cultural frameworks. So thanks again for everyone, and stay in touch through the homepage if you'd like to.